Have you ever woken up and felt like something was off? Not just a bad dream, but a deep, unsettling feeling that the world you fell asleep in isn't the same one you woke up to. For one man in Newark, New Jersey, this wasn't just a feeling. It was his reality. And it began on a seemingly ordinary night, September 18, 2019, just minutes before midnight. It started subtly. A book on his nightstand, which he swore he left open, was now closed. The next morning, the poster on his wall, a vintage film print he'd owned for years, seemed slightly tilted to the left. He straightened it, dismissing it as his imagination, maybe the building settling. But then, the changes became more pronounced. A blue coffee mug he used every day was suddenly red. The scuff mark on his wooden floor he'd been meaning to fix was just gone. Every morning was a new, tiny puzzle. A game of spot the difference he was being forced to play with his own life. Was he losing his mind? He started documenting everything. Before going to sleep, he'd take meticulous photos of his room from every conceivable angle, capturing every detail, every object in its designated place. His phone's gallery filled up with hundreds of nearly identical pictures of his bedroom. The next morning, he'd wake up, his heart pounding in his chest, and immediately compare the room to the photos from the night before. And there they were, the differences. The chair in the corner was now angled slightly towards the window. The stack of magazines on his desk had been reordered. A new crack, thin as a hair, appeared on the ceiling. It was undeniable, it was real, and it was escalating. He was living in a room that was slowly, methodically, rewriting itself while he slept. His friends thought he was stressed. His family suggested he see a doctor. But he knew what he was seeing. Desperate for proof, for someone to believe him, he decided to escalate his documentation. He wasn't just going to take photos anymore. He was going to film it. He set up a camera on a tripod, aimed it at the center of the room, and hit record before turning in for the night. He slept fitfully, dreaming of shifting walls and crawling furniture. The morning light streamed through the window, and the first thing he noticed was the biggest change yet. His entire bookshelf had swapped places with his dresser. It was a massive, physical impossibility. With trembling hands, he went to his camera, his last hope for sanity. He stopped the recording and scrolled back to the beginning of the footage. He pressed play. He watched himself get into bed. He watched the minutes tick by in the corner of the screen. He watched the shadows lengthen and shorten as the moon traversed the sky. He watched and watched for 8 solid hours. The camera recorded an utterly still, unchanging room. Nothing moved. Not the bookshelf, not the dresser, not a single speck of dust. The video showed a perfectly normal night in a perfectly normal room. But the room he was standing in, the room he was watching the video in, was different. His blood ran cold. The proof he sought had only deepened the mystery, creating an impossible paradox. The video was a lie. Or was his memory the lie? The changes were happening. He was sure of it. But if the camera couldn't see them, what did that mean? He felt a new kind of terror. A fear not of a shifting room, but of a shifting mind. He had to try again. That night, he set up 2 cameras from different angles. He even placed specific objects, a red ball, a yellow book, a silver coin, in the center of the floor. Directly in the camera's lines of sight. He documented their exact positions, then hit record and climbed into bed. Feeling like a scientist in the most terrifying experiment of all time. When he woke up, the room was almost unrecognizable. The bed was now against the opposite wall. The window was smaller. The door was now painted a dark green. The objects he'd placed on the floor were gone. He scrambled to the cameras. his hands shaking so violently he could barely operate them. He played the first video. Stillness, 8 hours of absolute, unblinking nothing. The room in the video was the room from the night before, not the twisted version he was standing in now. He checked the second camera. Same result, complete and total normalcy. It was then that a horrifying thought began to crystallize in his mind, a thought far worse than any ghost or intruder. What if the camera wasn't wrong? What if the footage was the truth? The video showed the room as it was. It wasn't the room that was changing every night, it was him. This realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't in his room anymore. Each morning, he wasn't waking up to a slightly altered version of his space. He was waking up in a completely different room, in a completely different reality that just happened to be almost identical to the one he left. He wasn't moving. The entire world around him was being reset, and he was being dropped into a new version of it, night after night. He was a constant, adrift in a sea of variables. Each new room was a near-perfect replica, but with tiny, flawed details. The red mug, the tilted poster, the bookshelf on the wrong wall. They weren't changes. They were errors in the replication. Copies of copies, degrading over time. The world was a simulation, and he was a glitch, retaining the memory of the previous version. The videos weren't showing a static room. They were showing the saved file of that particular reality, a reality he had already been forcibly moved from. The fear was suffocating. He was a prisoner, not of a room, but of an endless cycle of displacement. He could run, but where would he go? The next morning, he would just wake up back in a bed, in a room, in a world that wasn't quite his. He was utterly, completely alone, the only one who knew the truth. His home wasn't a place of comfort or safety. It was a cage, and the bars were redrawn every single night. This story makes you wonder. If you woke up tomorrow and a single, tiny detail in your life was different, would you even notice? And if you did, what could you possibly do? It serves as a chilling reminder that perhaps home isn't where you live. It's where you're trapped. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the unsettling. If you enjoy stories that question the very fabric of our reality, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments what you would do in this situation. Until next time, stay curious, and maybe check your room before you go to sleep tonight.